Absolute favorite Hebrew Bible reading comes from Ecclesiastes chapter 3. Those of us that are roughly the same age, you're the youngster, we remember a song going back somewhere in the 60s or 70s that this ought to stir our memory. Ecclesiastes chapter 3. To everything there is a season, a time for every purpose under heaven. A time to be born and a time to die. A time to plant and a time to pluck what is planted. A time to kill and a time to heal. A time to break down and a time to build up. A time to weep and a time to laugh. A time to mourn and a time to dance. A time to cast away stones and a time to gather those stones. A time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing. A time to gain and a time to lose, a time to keep and a time to throw away, a time to tear, a time to sow, a time to keep silence and a time to speak, a time to love and a time to hate, a time of war and a time of peace. And here we get to the meat of the whole thing. What profit has the worker from that in which he labors? I have seen the God-given task with which the sons of men are to be occupied. He has made everything beautiful in its time. Also, he has put eternity in their hearts, except that no one can find out the work that God does from the beginning to end. I know that nothing is better for them to rejoice and to do good in their lives, and also that every man should eat and drink and enjoy the good of all his labor, for that is the gift of God. And this is the word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. Now, every one of us sitting here this morning knows that there are proper times to say certain things. Mark, correct me if I'm wrong here. You know, Mark's a gardener, and I've listened to him talk about gardening and love gardening because he had a passion for it. Well, the last 10 years before he moved. And I learned from Mark that certain things like onions and lettuce should be planted in the early spring. Am I right, Mark? Yep. And I've learned through my own mistakes that if we're attending a funeral, maybe it's best if I don't say, come over here, guys, I've got a joke to tell you. And we gather in a corner, and all of a sudden, this loud guffaw of laughter comes out. Very, very inappropriate. I think we probably learned that if a family member is for some reason angry with us and thinks we don't care for him or her any at all, it may be times to wrap our arms around that person and assure her or him of our love. Words and actions do have proper times. And that's part of the wisdom teaching that comes to us this morning from the book of Ecclesiastes. Especially says the wisdom tradition, there is an appropriate time to keep silence or to say just the right word. And I think every one of us knows of times when the right word said at the right time has lent huge amounts of comfort to a troubled soul, or it might even have set someone's life that was taking the wrong turn, maybe set it on a better path. But I know in my life, when I have blurted out something in a context that I never should have said it, that I have just done the wrong thing. I know, and you know, of a gossip perhaps, who told a secret, something that was told to him or her in confidence that never should have been passed on. And that just rolled and rolled and rolled. And the negative things multiplied. There is a time to speak, as the text says, and there is a time to keep silence. Now, Ecclesiastes is a part of the body in the Hebrew Bible called wisdom writings. And we find it generally, primarily, Job, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, some in Psalms. And you can find just a tad in the New Testament, but you've got to look for it. I will tell you where to go if you're interested. Go to chapter 27 of the book of Matthew. Chapter 7, verses 24 through 27. You'll find a little bit of wisdom there. Anyway, the basic thought and belief of wisdom is that when God created this world of ours, He established certain orders. He established certain expectations in both the human life and in the natural life in the world around us. Customary ways, for lack of a better way to put it, with which both human beings and nature should and does act. And those customary things, those customary orders, have been discovered by the wisdom teachers by careful observation. And then those wisdom teachers thousands of years ago set down in the wisdom writings what they had learned of those natural orders that God expects. The wise person is one who learns what wisdom says. The wise person then acts in accordance with the ordered ways of nature and with human society, the way the world is. Such a person finds life, says wisdom, in that way. But then wisdom goes on to say the fool is the one who refuses to learn those orders. The fool is the one who defies those orders. The fool is one who acts contrary to those orders. And finally, wisdom says, such a fool finds death. And an illustration of that, perhaps, we might say that one of God's orders He set into marital life. And that order is long faithfulness, man to woman, woman to man, to your spouse. And such faithfulness can bring with it a good marriage, a marriage full of joy, a marriage full of happiness. But a fool ignores that. And the fool goes out and plays the field and does things that are wrong. And when that happens, that marital trust is destroyed. And the oneness, the unity of that husband, of wife, is fractured. And the marriage brings only trouble and heartache and generally ends in the death of that marriage and that relationship. As our text this morning shows, one of the orders that God has set into His creation is the order of time. And that's not just the cycle of seasons, not the days and the months and the years that we know, but it's also the order of time for my life and your life, which our lives find themselves in. The presupposition of wisdom is that all human activity is not successful and meaningful all the time, at every time. And if we don't know the proper time to do something, or the proper time not to do something, our activity can turn out very negatively. It can have bad fruit. The text goes on to say there's even a proper time to die. For each one of us, we age, the body ages as the years go by. And though our youth-oriented culture today does its best to deny the process of aging, it just can't do it. We all try to stay young looking. Hollywood stars, celebrities, figures in public life, they use every trick known to mankind. And there are plastic surgeons all over the world getting filthy rich. Well, they can cover things up for a while. Yeah, they can. Grow a beard, it helps. But eventually our age catches up to us. And when we get to that point, we know what wisdom says is right. Because wisdom says for us to teach us to number our days, that we can get a heart of wisdom. And when we learn that, then we know, no matter what happens, we are not gods. We are not goddesses. I'm just a man. You ladies are just women. And all of us, we are just mortal. We had a beginning. We will have an end. We're not the creator. We're the creatures. And that there is everlasting love all the way through the number of years that we live. And that love has held us right there in God's powerful, full of grace hands. Lent always establishes and emphasizes that fact when it includes in the ritual of marking our forehead with the ashes. And you remember what the minister, whether it's me or some other minister that is doing the service, says? From ashes you came, and from ashes you shall return. Or it may be dust to dust. There are any number of ways to say it. But what it is that we begin as dust, and we end as dust. And our passage in Ecclesiastes this morning tells us that as we begin this new year, we need to make the very most of what time we have ahead of us. We don't know. Ecclesiastes says, look carefully then how you walk, not as unwise persons, but as wise, making the most of the time, because the days are evil. Now, we have a choice. We can live our days joyfully in the service of God, or we can frivol away our days. We can waste them on things that don't amount to a hill of beans and that are foolish. But one thing is very certain. Our days eventually are going to come to an end. And perhaps instead of us vainly doing our best to prolong our lives beyond the proper time to die, maybe we should have the wisdom. Maybe we should have the wisdom to know when that proper time is. Now, I suspect that most of you sitting here this morning are familiar with the old saying, today is the first day of what? The rest of your life. I grew up with a sampler embroidered by my great Aunt Ruth hanging in our dining room. And I can remember that so well, and for so long, I didn't get it. I just didn't understand what that was all about. You got to get a little older to understand that sooner or later, the end is going to come. Well, Ecclesiastes is saying, you enjoy the good life that God has given to you. And in many ways, the book of Ecclesiastes is a joyful book. It is a grateful book. The writer of Ecclesiastes, some people call the teacher, some people call the preacher, doesn't make any difference. The writer is grateful. and thankful for the many gifts that God has just poured out on him. And he urges the same thankfulness from us and from his readers.